Chapter 4: Childhood Harm and the Body. Quote, "Sometimes it's like my nervous system is playing for a different team." End quote. Terry. When a psychotherapist collects their client, all too often the client's body gets left in the waiting room. People who experienced childhood harm are usually frustrated and even exhausted by the psychological problems they encounter. They are often desperate to change, either for themselves or the people they care about. But getting away from familiar, painful experiences can feel difficult, and the fact that change is so hard can be confusing as well. Bob was neglected by his mother and physically abused by his stepfather. As an adult, he had struggled with a mix of social anxiety and depression for many years. Quote, "My wife and friends say, 'Bob, you've got to think differently. Bob, you've got to stop reacting like that. Bob, snap out of it. I don't want to be the way I am, but it's just not that simple.'" End quote. Marion experienced childhood abandonment and neglect and had a long history of coping through eating disordered behaviors. Quote, "I hate the way I keep making a mess of things, but it's like there's something in me that just keeps going in the same direction." The fact that people like Bob and Marion so often feel stuck with their psychological problems is not because they don't want change, but because the effects of childhood harm have deep roots. Roots are hidden beneath the ground, and they can be very stubborn. One of the most important and helpful ways of understanding these deep roots of childhood trauma is to appreciate how a developing body and brain is affected by repeated distressing experiences. More specifically, we need to know how the autonomic nervous system develops in relation to the care or lack of care a child experiences. No one has been more helpful in clarifying the relationship between childhood harm and the development of the nervous system than Dr. Stephen Porges, who developed a model called polyvagal theory. We will be relying on this model to help explain why emotional and body-based problems can be so challenging for those who were harmed in childhood, but it's worth making a few brief comments up front. While many of our clients have found polyvagal theory to be really useful for their recovery, some have struggled to connect with the medical terminology it uses. Some clients have expressed confusion or frustration in therapy sessions. This has been the single most challenging chapter to construct, and several rewrites have been necessary as we received ongoing feedback from our clients. While we provide the important medical information, we substitute simplified language in order that Porges's essential insights can be accessible and memorable. 3 neurological pathways described by polyvagal theory. Polyvagal theory describes the 3 neurological pathways which make up our nervous system and helps us understand why healing body-based distress is such an important feature of recovery. We will explore this model in a moment, but you may already have an intuitive understanding of what these 3 pathways are all about because you were introduced to the window of tolerance previously. In a sense, the window of tolerance and polyvagal theory are different ways of describing similar experiences. However, polyvagal theory adds a lot of value because it provides a medical basis to our understanding and offers important ideas for how we can respond to distressing states. The autonomic nervous system controls all of our vital functions like breathing, digestion, and heart rate, often in ways we aren't consciously aware of. However, the autonomic nervous system has another important job: responding to threats and keeping us safe. On the surface, people who experience childhood harm may seek help for many different reasons. However, if there is one thing they all seem to struggle with, it's that they don't feel safe. To understand why people who experienced childhood harm have a problem feeling safe, we need to understand how the autonomic nervous system develops and operates. Polyvagal theory teaches us that our nervous system contains three separate but linked pathways, each evolving to help us respond to threats and meet our core needs for safety. These pathways run throughout our body from our brain to our toes, and it's important to note that the word body indeed includes the brain. Sympathetic nervous system, SNS. When activated, the sympathetic nervous system represents a mobilized state. Heart rate, blood pressure, breathing, and hormones such as adrenaline all increase. We tend to flip into this pathway if we are threatened or perceive we are threatened, but imagine we can defend ourselves. Emotions of fear or anger are common. To simplify language, we will refer to the sympathetic nervous system as the fight or flight pathway. Dorsal vagal system. When activated, the dorsal vagal pathway represents an immobilized state. We experience low heart rate, muscle tone, and energy. We tend to move into this pathway in instances where a threat seems so overwhelming that active defense seems impossible. Hormones and neurochemicals are released to protect us through shutting down, and we experience emotional numbing. This happens to conserve energy or to prevent an escalation of threat, and we may feel disconnected, dissociated, hopeless, or depressed. To simplify language, we will refer to the dorsal vagal nervous system as the shutdown pathway. Ventral vagal system. When activated, the ventral vagal pathway represents a relaxed state. We experience moderate heart rate, respiration, and muscle tone. It's fundamentally a state of safety, and hormones or neurochemicals are released which encourage social connection and creativity. We are present and connected. Co-regulation becomes possible, i.e., the giving and receiving of soothing and support within relationships. To simplify language, we will call the ventral vagal system the present and connected pathway. Special note, the sympathetic system and dorsal vagal pathways can work differently if we are in safe circumstances. If safe, we can experience the mobilization of the sympathetic nervous system as playfulness or excitement, as for example when we are engaged in competitive sport. When feeling safe, the dorsal vagal system can be experienced as a state of tranquility. However, we focus on ways these pathways operate as part of our threat response, as it is most pertinent to childhood harm and recovery. In a moment, you will have a chance to reflect on how you experience these three pathways within daily life. But first, it's important to point out that there are three reasons why understanding these neurological pathways can be so important for recovery. 1. Polyvagal theory may use ideas to describe experience, but these descriptions are based in medical science and research. It's a developing field, but it represents the leading edge in providing us with a solid medical explanation concerning the impacts of childhood trauma on the body as well as recovery. 2. Polyvagal theory helps us understand how essential it is to work with body-based and emotional issues with respect to creating experiences of safety and connection. Safety and connection can be created within relationships and the world, but as polyvagal theory tells us, they also need to be found within our own bodies. Recovery means being able to feel safe and comfortable within your own skin. 3. Many adults who experienced childhood harm blame themselves for the fact that they have struggled with coping and psychological problems for many years. Polyvagal theory provides a genuine explanation for why trauma produces such damn difficult challenges, and this can encourage individuals to be more self compassionate and less self punishing. Below, we provide examples of clients who experienced activation of the fight or flight, shutdown, and present and connected pathways. And then you will have an opportunity to reflect on your experiences. Mary Kay took a 3-hour train journey with two friends to London, which unfortunately activated her fight or flight pathway. Quote, my friends were lovely, but there were so many people on the train, and I kept looking around the carriage. We played cards, but my heart was pounding, my chest hurt, and I was shaking for most of the trip. I just wanted to get off the train, and I went to the bathroom 4 times just to get away. End quote. Charlie experienced a lot of emotional abuse as a child. He was dealing with a number of stresses, and when he saw an envelope from the gas company, it seemed like one too many problems, and he felt overwhelmed. His experience is a good description of responding to threats through the shutdown pathway. Quote, I'm watching a movie with my daughter, but I'm not hearing any of it. Later, when she went to bed, I was sitting on the couch just staring into space. I don't even know what I was thinking about or how long I sat there for. When I get like this, I'm just numb and I lose track of time. End quote. June had no memories of early childhood and had been abandoned to the care system. However, her experience of meeting her son's new partner allowed her to access the present and connected pathway. Quote, I'd been worried about meeting my son's new girlfriend, but she had such a warm and friendly smile on her face. She said she was really happy to finally meet me and asked me about my indoor plants. I just felt so relaxed with her that I forgot about being anxious. How can we know when we are largely in one pathway or another? As we will explore, pathway responses get triggered quickly and automatically. We often just find ourselves in a pathway response. However, there are typical physical, emotional, and behavioral clues which can help us work backwards and figure out which pathway is active. Chart 1 can help you with the exercise which follows. Please pause the audio and review Chart 1 in the guidebook. Exercise 1. Reflection on your experience of 3 pathways. There are no right or wrong answers to the 3 questions below, only answers you will understand. 1. Comparatively speaking, do you have a sense of how much time you spend with the fight or flight, shutdown, and present and connected pathways activated, i.e., how prominent a role each state plays in your life? 2. Do the fight or flight and shutdown pathways keep you safe and work as they should, or are they a problem in your life? 3. Is it difficult for you to access the present and connected pathway when you need to? Please pause the audio and do some journaling with Exercise 1 in the guidebook. How the nervous system operates is shaped by trauma. During childhood, how the nervous system develops relies on the quality of care received. Infants and babies are incapable of regulating or soothing their distress when the fight or flight pathway is triggered, and children have limited capacity in this respect. Imagine a baby who is hungry or wet, a young child frightened by a dog or distraught by an ice cream cone which has fallen onto the pavement, or an older child who is angry at a rejection. They will experience physical bursts of distress, fear, or anger, and the baby or child may have little capacity to soothe these states of physical and emotional dysregulation. The baby or child requires the presence of a caregiver to co-regulate or soothe these states. Reassuring and soft words or physical contact assist the child's nervous system to shift from the distress of a fight or flight state, sympathetic pathway, to being present and connected again, ventral vagal pathway. Through many such experiences, the baby or child learns to trust that distress can be soothed within caring relationships. And they are learning that there are ways they can soothe their own distress over time. However, children who experience abuse or neglect will experience many more situations where the fight or flight pathway is triggered, and there is often no one there to soothe this reaction and help them shift into the present and connected pathway. Over many such experiences, the brain and body gets shaped or toned to favor the fight or flight pathway, sympathetic nervous system. This can become a pattern of reacting, so it's not surprising that those who experienced childhood harm spend more time in fight or flight responses and have a difficult time finding present and connected experiences when they need it. But what about the shutdown response, dorsal vagal pathway? If threats are deemed as overwhelming and insurmountable, shutdown responses may be triggered and a child may freeze up, go numb, or cut off from experiences. This is a form of dissociation where you are being desensitized to what is occurring, and it is our body's way of trying to provide protection. If a child experiences emotional or physical abuse, which is overwhelming often enough, their nervous system will be shaped to favor a pattern of emotional numbing, shutting down, or dissociation. As with the fight or flight response, the shutdown response can become a pattern of coping. In summary, multiple instances of childhood harm can shape how the nervous system develops and operates. Fight or flight, sympathetic, or shutdown, dorsal vagal pathways may become more sensitive, easily triggered, and harder to shift out of. The safety of the present and connected pathway, ventral vagal, can seem less familiar and harder to access. These patterns often endure into the adult years. How polyvagal theory encourages insight and self-compassion. We have an entire chapter later in the program that focuses on self-compassion, but here is a brief definition. Self-compassion means being able to speak to yourself with kindness and support when it makes sense. Special note, if you intuitively don't like the idea of self-compassion, you are in good company. Lots of people who experienced childhood harm feel uncomfortable or annoyed just reading or hearing the word. Many people with trauma histories have a genius for self-blame in situations where they find it hard to appreciate that past trauma set them up for problems. Appreciating how past trauma leads to emotional distress getting expressed through your body can help you access self-compassion in a genuine way. Consider Nigel, a kind-hearted, middle-aged man who had been physically abused by a stepfather and neglected by his mother. As a consequence, Nigel spends a lot of time stuck in a fight or flight pathway response, and this occurs to varying degrees when he is in group therapy. During certain sessions, we could see he was visibly shaking and stammering as he spoke. During one check-in, he told the group, quote, "I'm so sorry. This shaking I experience must be so distracting for everyone, and it's hard for me to get words out. It's this way at home too, and sometimes my wife has to take the kids to clubs because I just can't do it. When it gets bad, I'm just so useless." End quote. Nigel's shaking was in fact not very distracting, but he felt so badly about it that he needed a lot of encouragement to prevent him from ending his work with the group. Like many people with trauma histories, Nigel was not only suffering, by being stuck at times in a fight or flight pathway response, but he was also generating a lot of self blame and worry with respect to group members, his family, etc. It's bad enough that those who experienced childhood trauma overreact to events through a fight or flight pathway response, but beating up on yourself amounts to pouring salt in a wound. Others can get stuck in a state of shutdown. They may withdraw from life and relationships, or be unable to face stressful situations. Being unable to recognize how trauma set them up, they may punish themselves for difficulties in coping. Polyvagal theory provides a couple of further explanations which encourage you to think about your reactions in a more insightful, realistic, and self compassionate way. Let's explore them. 1. You don't choose your body based reactions when triggered. No one who experienced childhood trauma wakes up and decides they are going to have a powerful anxiety reaction when out shopping, or that they are going to go into emotional shutdown when faced by a demanding customer at work. Fight or flight and shutdown pathways get triggered automatically. Stephen Porges coined the term neuroception to explain how we shift into fight or flight, sympathetic, shutdown, dorsal vagal, or present and connected, ventral vagal states. At a subconscious level, we constantly scan the environment, searching for signs of threat or safety. Imagine how your smartphone continuously searches for a phone signal, or a ship searches the sea floor using sonar. If someone shouts, if someone is suddenly behind us, or if we sense a warm smile on someone's face, our nervous system scans this information and makes nearly instantaneous decisions about threat or safety. Before we can determine through conscious awareness whether something is a threat, our nervous system has already shifted our physiology in preparation for defensive mobilization, defensive collapse, or social connection. In other words, before we can assess danger or safety through reflection, thinking, our heart may be pumping and our breathing may have quickened. Fight or flight, we may experience numbing and cutting off, shutdown, or we may feel relaxed and interested, present and connected. 2. Story follows state. Neuroception means detection, which happens at the level of our neurology. Neuroception is much faster than conscious reflection or thinking. What this means is that the information our bodies provide us through neuroception will influence how we think about our situation, relationships, and ourselves. Deb Dana uses the phrase story follows state to describe this process. Dana explains, quote, your autonomic, physical, and emotional state comes to life, and then the information is fed up to your brain, and it's your brain's job to make sense out of what's happening in the body. So it makes up a story, end quote. This represents a further idea which can encourage insight and self-compassion. Below are examples of how story follows state can operate. See what you can identify with. Mary is at an adult art class, and the teacher is asking students in turn to talk about the paintings they have been working at. Other students are speaking, and she is waiting to be called on. Mary's heart is pounding. She is perspiring, and her breathing is quick and shallow, a fight or flight state. Thoughts come to mind, such as, people are going to criticize my art. My art is rubbish. I will make a fool of myself when I try to speak. This is the story which follows from Mary's physiological or emotional state. Mark's wife asked for a divorce recently. He is having serious financial problems, and he is responsible for solving problems at work for which he has no answers. He's having lunch with some work colleagues who are talking. He isn't really taking in what is said, His gaze is unfocused, his body is slumped, he's disconnected and can't think, a shutdown state. A colleague asks Mark a question and he mumbles a response and realizes he misunderstood the question. Thoughts come to mind, such as, I'm useless, I'm making a mess of everything, I can't cope. This is the story which follows from Mark's physiological or emotional state. The finding that physical reactions can strongly influence the stories we create is not something which should depress or demotivate. Quite the opposite, really. Through learning about these processes, we can begin to consciously identify both our nervous system state and the stories it encourages us to tell ourselves. This can be a basis for change, which can provide a greater sense of control and support for your recovery. More about this in a moment. What can this mean for adults who experienced childhood harm? Some reassurance may be necessary at this point. For individuals who experienced childhood harm, it's not the case that your nervous system is damaged or broken. If we scan your nervous system, we will see that everything is as it should be. However, it's likely that it just operates differently than for many people who experienced safety and received emotion regulation in childhood. Three core dilemmas can develop for those who experienced childhood harm. Dilemmas which, fortunately, you can work on in positive ways. First, a person with a trauma history may flip into the fight or flight response in situations where they are largely safe. In other words, their body-based reaction and the story they tell themselves about an event is an overreaction. Julie experienced childhood neglect and abuse and lacked a secure attachment to provide the safety she needed. You can almost hear the voice of the fight or flight system in her description of an encounter with her partner Jim. Quote, Jim said that he bumped into his ex-girlfriend at Tesco's and they had caught up. My heart started pounding and it felt hard to breathe. I got really angry at Jim, and I know that wasn't right. Jim loves me, and it doesn't make sense to feel scared and angry like this, but it's like I can't stop it. End quote. The preconscious process of neuroception signaled a serious threat, and Julie's heart began pounding and her breathing quickened almost instantaneously. Her physiology also instigated a story which was unrealistic. Second, some people will find that the shutdown pathway gets triggered in situations where they need to be assertive or protect themselves. We mentioned Charlie earlier. Charlie was on the receiving end of physical and emotional abuse from both parents and was bullied at school. Unfortunately, his wife had quite a temper. Quote, when Linda gets angry, it's like I disappear. I can't think or say anything or even move. I just stand there like an idiot. End quote. For Charlie, the process of neuroception often signals that a threat is so overwhelming that escape or active defense will not suffice, so a shutdown, dorsal vagal, pathway gets activated. His emotions are numbed, and his capacity to think or respond is blunted. Dissociation, cutting off from experience, occurs along a spectrum, and Charlie often dissociates to a degree. Sometimes there is a genuine threat that the individual should respond to through active defense. If a company overcharges you, if someone insults you, if you see someone stealing your wallet or mistreating someone you care about, the activation of the fight or flight, sympathetic system, and feelings like fear or anger make sense. However, for some people, the numbing of the shutdown, dorsal vagal pathway prevents them from responding adequately. Adults who experienced childhood harm can sometimes blame themselves for not stopping abuse when it was happening as a child. However, The disengagement and emotional numbing that occurs when the shutdown pathway is triggered can explain why a child did not resist or run. At a preconscious level, the mobilizing of the fight or flight sympathetic pathway was seen as too dangerous, and the shutdown pathway was deemed as a better bet for safety. Because the body and brain shut down for protection at a preconscious level, the inability to fight or run was not a decision the child made. We need to honor and respect the child's attempts to find protection. They were doing the best they could at the time. Defensive mobilization through the fight or flight pathway, or shutting down, may have protected an individual during childhood. Being able to resist, run, hide, or numb the impact of harm may have shielded the child from further harm. However, as an adult, the fight or flight or shutdown pathways can now be easily activated through neuroception. On a physical and emotional level, the individual can experience the present moment as if it were the past. Third, whereas the fight or flight and shutdown pathways may become overly sensitive, the good feelings, safety, and social connection associated with the present and connected ventral vagal pathway may be harder to access. Such people often lacked childhood experiences where a parent soothed their distress. They lacked opportunities to learn how to soothe their own distress, self regulation, and they lacked opportunities to appreciate how people can soothe each other's distress, co regulation. The headline here is that the individual may come into adulthood with little trust that the emotional difficulties can be soothed through relationships with others, or confidence that they can soothe their own distress in healthy ways. Without being able to trust in themselves or others to soothe distress, attempts at self soothing are likely to happen in more extreme and isolated ways. Exercise 2: Problems responding to events. Below is an opportunity to journal how past trauma may have set you up to have difficulties responding to events. The questions below can act as a guide. 1. Are there experiences where you flip into the fight or flight pathway when you are likely quite safe, as was the case with Julie? 2. Like Charlie, are there instances when you experience a shutdown response, in other words, can't think, emotional numbing, when you need to be assertive, get to safety, or protect yourself? 3. Are there times when you know you are safe, but you nevertheless find it difficult to access the calm feelings of the present and connected pathway? Please pause the audio and do some journaling with exercise 2 in the guidebook. Applying polyvagal theory in real time. It may be interesting that we have a medically based theory of our nervous system which describes the way people can be affected by childhood trauma. But how is this meant to be helpful? The remainder of this chapter will support you in getting a start on using polyvagal theory to observe and respond to body-based distress and related stories about our experience. We hope this is a good start, but a note of realism is probably in order. As mentioned previously, childhood trauma has deep roots, and this is especially true with respect to how our nervous systems got shaped to operate. Neuroception is a preconscious experience, so our bodies react to events before